Ladies and gentlemen, RosterWatch Nation, welcome back to the epic RosterWatch Podcast, brought to you by Underdog Fantasy. Go to Underdog Fantasy right now to get a 100% deposit bonus up to $100 by using promo code ROSTER. That is Underdog Fantasy. Don't join the Best Ball Mania 3. These other contests too are just filling up like crazy. You can get 100% deposit bonus up to $100 by using promo code ROSTER. All right, joining the show today, one of the favorites, a rare repeat guest here on the pod. His name is John Daigle. You can now find him at 4for4.com. He's going to tell us about some things they have going on over at 4for4. You can also find him on Twitter at NotJDaigle on Twitter. That is at NotJDaigle. Daigle, of course, is spelled Daigle. Daigle, so good to have you on, brother. What the hell's going on?
Not just a single repeat either, an annual repeat. Sometimes I even come on with you mid-season, and I enjoy it even though I'm busy. But I will say, yes, previously I came on this podcast and I was with NBC. My good friends over there have since branched out to 4for4.com, as you mentioned. And I only want to bring it up at the top of the show because right now for friends only. And if you're listening to the RosterWatch podcast, you certainly are a longtime friend. You can use the promo code Daigle10. That is Daigle10 at 4for4.com to sign up. And that's where, if you enjoyed, for instance, last year's Roto World waiver wire column, in fact, the Roto World waiver column from the last 3 years, that's where it will be this year, since I'm taking my talents, not to South Beach, but over there. And we'll have the first one up here the first week of September before week 1. So that, not to mention team previews, are wrapped up, all 32, written by me, updated throughout training camp, will also be wrapped up by Friday. So by the time you're probably listening to this podcast. So Daigle10, that's the promo code.
Hey, Daigle, I didn't ask you about this beforehand, but are you going to do you're 4for4 now? Are you going to do any DFS stuff?
I am, and actually didn't play on this, but Daigle10 also gets you not only that redraft stuff I mentioned, not only the private, which will be private this year behind the paywall, waiver wire chat that was actually always NBC's highest watched YouTube video weekly with everyone. That's going to be in the 4for4 Discord, but it includes the DFS package for 4for4 as well. And myself, TJ Hernandez, and Tim Talmadge will actually be doing our own Friday night DFS show once injury reports come out. Not to mention, I will actually be doing my own column, Top Plays for 4for4, and updating them throughout the weekend. So I actually think I'm going to be, even though personally I was involved in DFS, I actually think it's going to be more front-facing, even more this year.
Are you gonna do what's the pod with TJ, the DFS MVP? Are you gonna do that one with him?
That'll be a 20 to 30 minute free tease, but we're going to be doing a paywalled one Friday night where I can drink and get sloppy and just tell you how my brain's working over what the hell everyone's doing in DFS since it changes daily.
Well, dude, I mean, I do the show on Roto Grinders. I've been doing it for years with Cardi, and we put it up on RosterWatch too. And we do that show on Saturday because it just feels like you said, man, it's like a lot of times all this stuff is just waiting for Friday. You know, you wait for Friday, the injury reports come out. All the content that comes out prior to that is just sort of prelude. It's like, what do we do if we get this news on Friday? Like, what are we going to do if this happens? Like, by the time Friday comes around, like, you know, I feel like that the content that you get on, you know, Friday nights, Saturdays and stuff, as far as DFS, that's sort of like the finished product. That's sort of the best when you have all the best information. So it'll certainly be great to hear from Daigle about all that stuff. And we'll be looking forward to it, brother. Of course, though, the people right now are coming to you for the redraft takes. They got to know what they're doing just for their home leagues, Daigle. So let's just talk about some of this news, some of the takeaways coming out of the preseason games. I wanted to ask you just first off, do you have any thoughts about just the Patriots offense in general and this whole stuff that's come out? It's like, is Matt Patricia really calling plays? And does that bother you at all? Also, do you believe all the talk? And do you think it's kind of weird that we're getting this talk from Bill Belichick, who never talks up players, but he's talking up Ramondre Stevenson? It's like a bizarro world where Bill Belichick is talking about how good a guy is in pass pro and stuff like that. It's like almost like maybe this whole James White role that, you know, a lot of fantasy analysts have been wish casting for Ramondre Stevenson might be coming to fruition. How do you see it? How do you see the Patriots?
There are lots of ADP dips right now that I'm buying into. Overall in the Patriots offense, I think I'm more down than most. Like, I don't mind Mac Jones as a QB 2 or 3 in best ball, but we're now getting into redraft season where I'm certainly not waiting and punting that onesie position with Mac Jones. Even last year, if we take into account that 3-attempt game and the Buffalo Storm on Monday Night Football and just remove it altogether, Mac Jones did average an increased 32 pass attempts per game in the rest of those contests. But overall, like you said, Matt Patricia now, do we actually trust this offense? So where I'm kind of falling in line is taking chances on Devonte Parker, who we know will be on the field every single snap. Like, not only in 2 wide sets, but also in red zone personnel, not where they'll use Jacoby Myers. So while Jacoby Myers can get by as a high reception floor guy, like, Jacoby Myers doesn't have touchdown equity and thus doesn't have upside. So I'm not really worrying about him unless we draft rookies like a Garrett Wilson, like a Sky Moore. We stack our rosters there, and then we know most likely they won't deliver in the first month or so. And that's when I'm taking Jacoby Myers as just a bridge to those players in my lineup, especially in PPR formats. But Devonte Parker, you know, when averaging 7.5 targets per game the last 2 years in Miami, like, I still want to be higher on him as a player who's not going to come off the field. Not to mention, right now we're seeing Damien Harris going 2 or 3 rounds behind in most high-stakes drafts, Ramondre Stevenson. The event we needed to happen for Stevenson did happen, and James White either being injured or, in this case, retiring. So now we know Ramondre Stevenson is the pass-catching back. For what it's worth, James White, in only 2 games with Mac Jones last year, averaged 14.5 fantasy points in PPR leagues. So we think Ramondre Stevenson can get by that way. But I don't like saying he's going to emerge as a 3-down option or have a goal line role, because we have literally a decade of evidence with Bill Belichick and how he uses his backfield. Last year in drafting Damien Harris, even, the argument was never that he was going to be a 3-down player. And guess what? He wasn't a 3-down player. He just happened to score double-digit touchdowns because Cam Newton vacated a league high in carries inside the 5-yard line for someone to take over. And we know it was going to be the big-bodied Damien Harris. Same thing this year, where Damien Harris was one of only 2 running backs last year to have over 30 carries inside the 10-yard line. That is not Ramondre Stevenson's role, and do not pretend like it is. So I still think Damien Harris is a tremendous value if the Patriots can build leads. That's the question, though, because if they can't build leads because of Matt Patricia, then the answer is Ramondre Stevenson anyhow. I'm still buying the dip on Harris in every league, though.
What about Matt Patricia's old team, the Lions? Man, like, whenever I watch that offensive line with all those guys healthy, you know, that is an ass-kicking offensive line. They look really, really good. And you know that's sort of the identity of the team that a coach like Campbell would certainly want. You know, that's what they've wanted. Whether it's going to lead to winning, who knows? But their team's certainly being built in the image that it feels like those guys are going for. Whenever you have DeAndre Swift going as a sort of borderline first-round pick right now, there's also Jamal Williams, and DeAndre Swift did look good in the first preseason game. He did score the touchdown, but I believe it was on the 10 snaps that were with the first-team offensive line. It was 6 snaps for Swift, 4 snaps for Jamal Williams. I just wonder, for you, where are you on Swift? Do you think that this is going to be a committee that's bothersome for you with Swift, or are you more worried about injury? Are you in on Swift? Like, how do you see this whole thing playing out with the Lions run game?
And it was a committee last year. Remember, Jamal Williams made 10 appearances alongside DeAndre Swift, and he still averaged 12 touches per game behind Swift. So I think both Swift and Williams provide value. Williams is not a sexy pick, but also remember, in 3 starts without Swift, Jamal Williams handled 19 touches in those games. So we don't want to treat him like a player who can provide value or bridge production while waiting for like a contingency option if you draft Isaiah Spiller, Rashad White, Tony Pollard behind him. But really, Williams is that player with upside in the event Swift gets out of the way. I'm still trying to chase Swift, though, in the back of the first round. I think there's an argument to be made with him and Saquon Barkley really at the turn. And the good news is we know that Swift last year, at least in this Dan Campbell offense, did average 6 targets per game, which tied Leonard Fournette for the league high at their position. And so knowing that he somehow has stacked 108 receptions through 26 career games, like it's actually pretty good in PPR leagues, in my opinion, still chase him. The issue, though, where I come into is everyone thinks Jared Goff is undervalued as like a late QB. And maybe it's the case if he has spike weeks, but also like I don't trust this Lions offense as much as everyone else. I'm actually considering them more like the Broncos of last year or even the Jets this year, where they're still a quarterback away from being competitive. I'm one of the few people actually, and sharp people are actually on their over 6.5 win totals. I'm one of the few people who's on under. But even last year, Jared Goff, a 3-year low. So now we've seen his fantasy points per game and yards per attempt decline progressively in 3 consecutive seasons. TJ Hawkinson as well is being touted as a dead zone tight end. Everyone's trying to draft as a tight end 6 or 7, depending.
We have a tight end dead zone these days.
We do have a tight end dead zone.
Okay.
And like, honestly, my argument is like TJ Hawkinson is actually the worst pick in all of fantasy, given this theoretical wanderlust upside we keep giving him. Like even last year, he had a career high in targets per game, target share, and catch rate, and still finishes the tight end 15 in points per game. Like there is no upside. We are waiting for nothing to happen, and yet everyone's still drafting him where there's so much better players in the 8th or 9th round at every other position. Just expand your brain. Don't get locked in on needing a tight end. So I definitely think everyone should just basically never draft TJ Hawkinson unless he falls to the 12th or 13th round, which he'll never do. So yeah, I'm actually a little more down on the Lions offense than most, but given his reception upside, I do think Swift does have a case at 12, 13 overall.
Well, all right. So let's talk about a guy who everybody's down on and what we do with this, Daigle. We need advice from Daigle. What do we do with Antonio Gibson now? Because Antonio Gibson in the preseason game, he fumbled. Then he was benched for Brian Robinson, Brian Robinson then scored a touchdown. Gibson had to come back in with the backups. Now we've gotten word this week that he's working with the damn third team. He's working as a punt gunner, stuff like this. Mm-hmm. I mean, and here's the thing. Brian Robinson is not that good a prospect. So I understand that he was good. He was decent. He was decent in college, SEC guy, Alabama guy. But he will also, he came into the league. He's old. This isn't your average Alabama. This isn't the Damien Harris or Josh Jacobs or any, this isn't the same guy, right? How worried are you that now J.D. McKissic is going to be back? Now Brian Robinson, who's not even that good, is taking away a bunch of snaps from this guy, and everybody in Washington D.C. seems to just complain about the fact that he fumbles too much. Antonio Gibson does, and close observers of the team. I'll admit I hadn't really noticed it as much last year, but they do break out the all-22 and say, look at this hole that he missed on this one play. Look at this opportunity that was missed by Antonio Gibson last year. There was some frustration with the coaching staff and with very, very close observers of that team that Antonio Gibson left a lot of meat on the bone. Do you believe those things? What is your take on Antonio Gibson, and how far does he need to fall before you're interested in taking him? I've seen him go in the 6th round, 7th round.
Like you, I started worried and have now become even more tremendously worried given all the news you said. Also, like you, I've been on this with you the entire time. Brian Robinson is a terrible prospect. It is literally someone I did not care about whatsoever, even when he was drafted. Doesn't matter at all. Mm-hmm. You have to go all the way back actually to 2007 to find an Alabama running back who didn't average over 5 yards per carry, Terry Grant. And Brian Robinson was the next this past year. He hasn't shown talent, honestly. He just got a lot of carries and is big and old. That's it. So I don't really worry about Robinson breaking out, but we do know he has the goal line role and short yardage situation. So if you're going to project one running back in Washington to lead the team in touchdowns, it would be Robinson. So I continue drafting him everywhere, not for his talent, but for his situation. And same thing as J.D. McKissic, 15.5% target share last year when available. Gibson didn't break out with 27 touches per game until McKissic was injured, and Gibson came out post-bye as literally the only running back this team could use. So no, there's really no reason to draft Gibson at his current range in around the 6th round because he's poor man's Elijah Mitchell. He's going to get those empty carries inside the 20s and then get taken off the field on both conversion downs and in the red zone, which is not what we want. We don't want a 15 to 18 carry player per game who gets 0 catches, 60
scoreless yards,
right, and zero money downs. And honestly, 15 to 18 may even being generous right now. So if there's like Josh Jacobs, there is a range Gibson can fall where I will take him, and it's higher than Josh Jacobs still. I don't want anything to do with Jacobs. But
really? So
Yeah.
for you, Gibson over Jacobs for sure. Like,
yeah, because we know that the Raiders are going to use 4 backs. Like, they're going to go the full committee approach, and everyone will only be using their role. And I don't know if Josh Jacobs has goal line role, to be honest. They may just hammer it to Zamir White, who, as you know, profiled as that thunder lightning combo player, big bodied bruiser on the goal line. So I'm not sure that's going to happen. Also, remember Josh Jacobs, not to deter from Gibson's ADP, but remember Josh Jacobs actually in half PPR scoring on Underdog did not have a top 10 game, did not finish inside the top 10 running backs until week 18 when everyone's league was done. Like, he literally did nothing for you. He didn't finish outside the top 34, but he also didn't finish inside the top 10. So it's just like, who the hell is this guy? And he did that with career highs and targets and catches per game. Now, under a new regime and declining his final player option, we don't expect them to use him in that role at all. So, like, I just don't see where he provides any value, even as an RB2. But Gibson, I will still bet on the profile, even though all the news suggests I don't. And like, if he falls to the 8th round, let's say, because he is falling there, 8th, 9th round, that's where I don't mind taking him.
Do you like, just out of curiosity, I know I didn't tell you I was going to ask this, but I mean, do you consider, would you rather have like AJ Dillon than those guys and stuff? Like, I mean, like, what is that a guy you like, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, these types of players? I mean, what about, I mean, I'm assuming you have ETN above them. Do you have ETN above those guys?
Oh yeah. I mean, ETN has become a early 3rd pick. I want ETN in the mid 3rd. I think there's a tier drop off even after, like, I think Breece Hall even is probably in the next tier of guys with Elijah Mitchell, J.K. Dobbins, A.J. Dillon, for example. I think ETN's ahead of those players. So I am trying to grab ETN in the mid-tier. The issue is he's getting squeezed now, especially in FFPC high-stakes league. So, like, his upside is getting baked into the 2nd, 3rd round turn. But for Dillon, I do like Dillon. My one worry is that Dillon is getting elevated, not for his talent, but because we don't want to draft any of those other backs. Like, now that Gibson and Jacobs, that Gibson and Jacobs are falling, Dillon has naturally been elevated, not for his situation, but because of the other players. But remember, like, when Aaron Jones returned from that knee injury last year, week 12 on, Dillon actually did outtouch him 23-11 inside the red zone and 12-5 inside the 10-yard line. So as a player we didn't expect to earn targets in the league than to do what he did last year in the receiving game in particular, like, Dillon does have upside. So he's naturally gone to the top of that ranks.
All right. One more before I ask you a couple of big questions and just, and get you out of here, Daigle. It's about the Christian McCaffrey handcuff. Do you have, I mean, with Christian McCaffrey out in the first preseason game for the Panthers, Chuba Hubbard and Deontay Foreman, they basically split the reps evenly with the Panthers. To me, it was like whenever Foreman came in, I was just like, oh, Chuba's done. It's like, this is done. It doesn't really seem like that's exactly the case. We know that Matt Rule's, we've all heard the story about Matt Rule's wife calling him during the draft and saying like, hey man, Chuba's on the board. What are you doing? Don't you remember playing against him at Oklahoma State? Like, get that guy on your team. But I do think they might like him more than the average fantasy player. I'm just wondering, to you, a lot of people are drafting Christian McCaffrey, and they're in season-long redraft leagues and home leagues. A lot of people still like to draft handcuffs. Do you have any thoughts about who the best handcuff is there for CMC if you're looking to get insurance on your top pick?
I genuinely think it's just going to be split, and there's no right answer. I will say in the first preseason game, Chuba Hubbard did handle 6 third down snaps to Deontay Foreman's 2. And remember, it's only the first preseason game, but they did play the entire first half, split touches. No other running back came on the field in that first half, and they got to play alongside Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, and PJ Walker. So they ran both through the gamut and said, let's see what you can do. And Hubbard came out snapping Foreman 16-12, and more importantly, had those conversion down snaps where we hope he would get receptions. So you then have to go back and argue, well, is Hubbard even good? Like, is he efficient? Because last year he showed he's really not, whereas Deontay Foreman went the opposite direction and finally rose up like the Undertaker in dynasty leagues and was startable down the stretch. So I still lean Hubbard in this situation, but honestly, Foreman's the more talented player. So maybe it's a situation to stay away from altogether.
Yeah, well, and it's it's like sometimes like that, if you're going to be taking, Christian McCaffrey, maybe with one of those picks, if you shoot for the stars and maybe get somebody who can maybe take over. What if McCaffrey stays healthy, right? Mm-hmm. You could instead of picking one of those guys at the end, you can maybe pick a Tyrion Davis-Price or something like that could, end up taking over his backfield instead of just, betting on the fact that your number one pick is going to get hurt. Yeah. All right. Again, he is John Daigle. You can find him on Twitter at notjdaigle, Daigle, a great friend of RosterWatch and a great friend of all of RosterWatch Nation. We ask you guys to mobilize, unite, go give him a follow over there and support the work he's now doing at 4for4.com. All right, Daigle, just a couple of questions here. These are the big ones that everybody cares most about. Okay, is the toughest ones right at the very end. Name one player who's greatly exceeded your expectations thus far through preseason and fall camp. So this is somebody who you didn't have big expectations for coming in that you look at it now and say, damn, that's a lot more than I was expecting.
It is Damien Pierce. And that's just because we don't know how the hell Florida decides to use their players. Like, also, why was Kadarius Toney basically never used? It's so odd. And Pierce, go ahead.
Oh, I'm just beaming with pride. I love to hear about Damien Pierce. I love to hear what idiots Florida was. I love it all, Daigle.
It's just confusing, knowing that in his last 2 seasons when he was a full-time starter, 5.5 yards per touch, didn't miss a single pass block and pass pro, and 1.8 yards per route run. Like, literally did it all. And then we saw in the first preseason game, only 5 carries, but broke multiple tackles on those 5 carries and averaged over 9 yards per carry. He's by far the most explosive back in Houston's backfield and very easily could lead all rookie running backs in carries. So he's a player that continues to surge. But the good news is, because we get so locked up in Underdog and FFPC leagues over the summer, everyone forgets how Wild West home leagues are.
Oh, dude. Yeah,
no one knows who the hell Damien Pierce is in home league. So you walk into your home league, you're going to get Damien Pierce in the 15th round, and you should be ecstatic.
Yeah, man. It's every year. It takes a mental, it just takes this change of focus from dynasty to best ball, right? And then from best ball to managed leagues. It's just, and you always forget, man, these home league managed leagues, dude. It's a whole different world. Okay. And then the other question, just the inverse. Name one player who you just had the highest expectations of, and based on your initial expectations, just the player who has just let you down just the most through the course of this preseason, through the course of fall camps, just the one who you had the highest hopes for that is just gone splat.
I almost think it's Cam Akers, to be honest. I keep going back and forth because I thought Cam Akers was a fine selection after Ezekiel Elliott, not really worrying about, more worried about efficiency than his touches. Remember, in that last stretch in his rookie year when he won the starting job and came back healthy, he handled 88% of their backfield touches. And we saw last year in 12 games that the Rams starting running back did not leave early or get injured. 11 of those 12 games, actually, the starter handled at least 70% of backfield touches. Sean McVay only wants to use one back. But now we know both him and Henderson, of course, who have battled ankle injuries going all the way back to Memphis. They've tried to give Henderson the job several times over the course of his career, and he's just never been able to stay healthy. It is one thing, like a Christian McCaffrey situation, to not draft an explosive and high ceiling player and cite injury luck, but also it's a skill to stay healthy, and Henderson doesn't have that skill. And so I wanted to be higher on Akers, but now we see Akers dealing with a separate injury altogether and also was splitting first team reps with Henderson in camp prior to that. So I think I've lost a lot of the luster on Cam Akers, unfortunately.